Hello, everyone, and welcome to the last of the webinars in this series called Making of Modern Georgia for this academic year. It is my pleasure to welcome you today. My name is Salome Tsereteli Stevens. I'm the current president of the Georgian Association, and this has been a wonderful adventure that started out as an idea and with the help of so many talented and committed volunteers across the US, actually, and also wonderful speakers and guests from all over the world, um, has come together and has come to fruition. And we could not be any more grateful. And we are grateful that you are here today and watching this session. Let me thank most of all Professor Stephen Jones, who is here, who is the board member of the Georgian Association in the US, distinguished scholar of Georgian studies and the founder of the Georgian Studies program at the Davis Center at Harvard University, author of multiple books. I will make a quick pitch for his most recent book here about the first social democracy. If you haven't got your hands on it yet, I highly recommend it. And he will be the moderator for our conversation today. The topic, when we first planned it about a year ago, I don't think we thought, Stephen, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think that we thought that it was going to be so acute and so current for the day
Mhm,
that we are speaking
mhm,
about today. And,
mhm.
it's interesting that we are closing this season with this conversation because it's almost like a conversation to be continued because the movement of people is going to continue and has continued over the centuries and is still something that we are dealing with here in the US as well as in Georgia. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Stephen Jones, who is the moderator, and he will introduce the guests for today. If you are attending as a participant, you can ask your questions throughout the session in the Q&A, and the guests will be answering questions after their short presentations. But if you have missed any of our previous sessions, you can watch them on YouTube, on the Georgian Association YouTube channel. All of the recordings are now posted. You can also visit our website, where we have posted a bookshelf of recommended readings from the resources that previous participants have suggested. And be in touch. There are ways to get in touch on our website. You can sign up for our newsletter that comes out about quarterly. You can sign up to volunteer in the future. And again, welcome. And let's hear from our guests today. Over to you, Stephen.
Well, thank you so much, Salome, and really excited to be here with you. Thank you for giving up your hopefully sunny Saturday afternoon for this webinar, and think it'll be worth it. This is the final seminar or webinar, I should say, as Salome pointed out. It's been very successful. We have had a lot of attendees. I imagine this series as some form of tutorial on Georgian history, and I think it's very appropriate that we finish off with migration because this is such a central aspect of Georgian history, not only today, but for its entire existence as a state or multiple states. So very glad to be here, glad to have you with us. Let me tell you something very briefly about the format. I'm going to introduce the two speakers to you. And after I've done that, I'm going to hand it over there to them to make their presentations. And they will have about 10, 15 minutes. I'm going to then ask both of them a set of questions. And that will leave us, I'm hoping, at least 20 minutes or maybe even more than that for questions from the audience, which you should put in the Q&A. And then I will feed that to the speakers. So that's the format. I did miss out, by the way, that I also want to say a few words at the beginning about the issue of migration. So I will do that as well. Um, Let me just first introduce the two speakers. Our first speaker is Lasha Vashikidze. He's a project assistant at the Council of Europe office in Georgia, and a migration human rights specialist with more than 10 years of professional experience in international organizations, government institutions, and academia. He holds a PhD in American Studies from the International Black Sea University, where his dissertation examined the historical development of Georgian migration to the United States from the 19th century to the present day. His professional experience includes the Council of Europe, the International Organization for Migration, Caritas Georgia, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Georgia, where he worked on migration governance, refugee settlement, diaspora engagement, reintegration programs, and human rights initiatives. So welcome, Lasha. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Let me now just turn to our second guest, Marina Chitashvili, who will follow Lasha. Marina is a professor of psychology at Tbilisi State University. She received her PhD and later her habilitation from the Institute of Psychology at the Georgian Academy of Sciences. She is the author of 3 books. Her book, Psychology of Religiosity, Empirical Studies, was the first book exploring the personality characteristics and the social values of Georgian Orthodox believers. She was also the founder of the Center for Social Sciences, which I was very heavily involved in, and executive director there from 2003 to 2013. Marina was also the Director General for the National Science Foundation of Georgia, known as the Rustaveli Foundation, between 2014 and 17. Her research interest currently is the personality and social dimensions of authoritarianism. Using the World Values Survey data collected on Georgia since 1998, she is leading an interdisciplinary team of young researchers to explore the personal and social factors behind the rise of authoritarianism in Georgia. So, as you can see, we have 2 very experienced speakers, specialists in the field, although Marina is more of a psychologist than a migration specialist, but I've asked her to focus on the social and psychological aspects of migration, and I think we're in for a real treat. So I'm going to just say a few words about migration and Georgia. Very quick introduction, and then I'll hand it over to Lasha. So migration is the story of humanity. We're always on the move. Migration is central to the formation of peoples and nations, and it runs through Georgian history like a thick red line. I was in Georgia in 2005 when migration, history, and identity all got mixed up into the discovery of Zvezda and Mzia in Dmanisi in eastern Georgia. Zvezda and Mzia were nicknames for 2 hominin skulls found in Dmanisi, and they were migrants from Africa 1.8 million years ago. They were the first antecedents, if you like, of humans in Eurasia. And this made Georgians, according to President Saakashvili, the first Europeans. Georgia, as a small state among acquisitive empires, has always served as either the buffer or the gateway to foreign armies, traders, missionaries, and refugees. Georgia's history is migration, and it is reflected in the faces, in the food, the literature, the religion, and the values of Georgians today. We've had 9 webinars on the decisive influences of Georgian identity, and almost all of them, such as religion, trade, custom, or language, are entangled with population movement. Today, we are discussing migration patterns in Georgia in the 20th and the 21st centuries. 2 world wars, the destruction of multiple empires, industrialization, which led to massive internal migration, the incorporation of Georgia into the Soviet Union, the economic catastrophe of the 1990s and 2000s, all of this stimulated the scattering of Georgians around the world. At least 861,000 Georgians, probably more, left their homeland between 1991 and 2020. Today, I've asked our speakers to focus on both aspects of migration, on immigration and emigration. Population mobility is a constant in Georgian history, but the patterns change. Today, the answer as to who is moving, how many, and where they are going will be very different from a century ago. Tbilisi, the capital, is a very different place from even 2 decades ago, with the arrival of South Asian students, Chinese restaurateurs, and Middle Eastern gig workers. Lasha is a specialist in migration in Georgia, and he will provide the context to today's changing patterns. And Marina, I've asked to focus on the impact of migration on Georgians at home. What are the social and psychological problems that come with these changing migration patterns? So that's all I wanted to say, and I'm going to hand it over now to Lasha, and I'm going to give him around 15 minutes to make his presentation, and then I will hand it over to Marina. So Lasha, it's all yours.
Thank you, Professor Stephen. Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Stephen Jones and the Georgian Association in the United States for inviting me for this wonderful discussion. My name is Lasha Vashakidze. I recently, as Professor Jones said, finished my PhD research on Georgian migration to the United States, examining what I call three waves of Georgian migration to the United States from 19th century till today. And today I would like to briefly discuss how migration has shaped Georgia historically. Oh, sorry. How migration patterns changed after independence in 1991 and what migration means of Georgia's future. Uh, Personally, I think migration is often discussed as an economic issue, but it is also a demographic, cultural, and social phenomenon. In many ways, understanding migration helps us better understand modern Georgia itself. So let me just share my presentation. Just a minute. Uh, uh, if the host could give me an access for
You
sharing
got
my
it.
presentation. Yeah, thank you. Mm. So I hope you can see my presentation. Yes, yeah, perfect. So let's go. Why migration matters. When we discuss migration, we are not simply discussing people crossing the borders. Migration affects population size, economic development, family structures, and even national identity, I would say. For Georgia, migration has had a particular importance and important impact, I would say. It has contributed to formation of large and active diaspora community across the world, and namely in United States. So it has brought remittances and support thousands of Georgian families. So it has created opportunities for educational and professional development abroad. And at the same time, migration has also produced serious challenges, including population decline, aging, labor shortages, and concerns about the brain drain. Therefore, the central question I would like us to consider today is simple. How has the migration influenced Georgia's development from the 19th century, let's say? So, on that matter, we are going to the next slide. So, my doctoral research identifies three major waves of Georgian migration to the States. The first wave occurred between the late 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. These migrants mainly originated from Guria and Raja, and their migration was largely connected to the economical issues back then in Georgia. Many sought better opportunities abroad due to the poverty and social hardship. And this period also included the famous Gurian riders, roughback riders, who performed in Buffalo Bill's Wild West shows and became some of the earliest Georgians who have visited America. so United States. So after that, we're gonna go to the second wave, which began after the Soviet occupation of Georgia in 1921 and continued after the Second World War. Or Second World War. Unlike the first wave, these migrants were primarily political refugees, I would say. So many of them had to leave Georgia because of the Soviet Union and Soviet rule and the way they opposed this regime back then. So they often saw themselves as representatives of free Georgia, living in exile and worked hard to preserve Georgian culture and the national identity abroad. So, on that note, we are going to the third wave of Georgians migrating to United States, and it began in 1991 after the collapse of the Soviet Union. The wave was fundamentally different, I would say. For the first time, migration became a mass phenomenon affecting almost every region of Georgia, nearly every social group, I would say. And economic instability, unemployment, and the new global opportunities encouraged large numbers of Georgians to seek opportunities abroad, so they found United States on that matter. And this third wave remains the most significant migration movement in the modern Georgia, I would say. So let's go to the next slide. Why Georgians leave? Eternal question, I would say. The reasons people migrate are usually explained through what migration scholars call push and pull factors, I would say. So, push factors are the circumstances that encourage people to leave their country. So, in Georgia, these have included unemployment, low wages, economic uncertainty, and the limited professional opportunities for the Georgian citizens. And the pull factors, I would say, are the attractions of destination countries. In our case, United States of America, which has, compared to Georgia, higher incomes, better educational opportunities, more dynamic labor markets, and family reunification opportunities all play important roles, I would say. So, as a result, Georgian migration has been directed towards several major destinations. Historically, Russia was the primary destination. Later, in beginning in the 90s, like Greece, Turkey, Italy, Germany also, and the United States became increasingly important from over time. And today, the migration decisions are often, say, influenced not only by the economics, but also by the education, lifestyle, professional ambitions, and long-term family plans, I would say. So let's go to the next slide. Why why the United States? The United States occupies a special place in Georgian migration story, I would say, and the history. For many Georgians, America represents opportunity, higher education, innovation, mobility. So historically, Georgian migrants have reviewed the states not only as a place to earn money, but also a place where personal and professional success can be achieved. So several pathways have traditionally connected Georgians with the United States, and this includes family reunification, student visas, professional opportunities, and the diversity visa lottery, which has been particularly important for many Georgian families. At the same time, for the recent years, as we have witnessed more complicated migration patterns occur, and we have seen growing numbers of Georgians attempting illegal and irregular migration through Latin America, namely from Mexico, highlighting both the attractiveness of the United States and the difficulties some migrants face in pursuing legal migration channels. Nevertheless, the United States remains one of the most important destinations within the Georgian migration imagination, I would say. So let's go to the next slide, the brain drain or brain circulation. Growing up in Georgia, I was hearing these phrases all over, and almost every day when I was back at school. So, one of the most frequently discussed issues, I would say. So, Georgia increasingly faces the challenge of losing highly educated and skilled individuals like doctors, engineers, researchers, IT professionals, and young generation often find attractive opportunities abroad. And naturally, this creates concerns about the labor shortages and long-term economic development in Georgia. So, however, migration is not always one-way process. Many migrants acquire new skills, education, international experience, and professional networks while living in abroad in states, let's say. Some eventually return to Georgia, but not many. I would say others contribute through investments, businesses, cooperation, research partnerships, and of course, diaspora initiatives. For reasons, many researchers increasingly speak not only about the brain drain, but also brain circulation, I would say. The, the challenge for Georgia is finding ways to transform migration into the developmental resource rather than simply viewing it as a loss. So let's go to the next slide. The demographic future of Georgia. The demographic dimension of migration may be the most important long-term challenge facing Georgia. Today, Georgia faces several interconnected trends, let's say. So the population is aging, the birth rates remain relatively low. Many young people continue to live, yeah, they do. And these trends reduce the size of the working age population while increasing pressure on healthcare systems, let's say, and social services and pension systems also. So some regions are already experiencing the population and labor shortages, namely mountain regions of Georgia's had a really good situation there. So migration is not the only cause of these demographic challenges, but it is certainly one of the most important factors, I would say. And as a result, the key question for policymakers is not whether migration will continue. Migration is now a permanent feature of Georgian society. And the real question is how Georgia can manage migration in a way that supports sustainable demographic and economic development. So, to go to the last slide of my presentation, conclusions and future outlook, let me conclude with these three simple observations. First, the migration has been part of Georgia experience for more than a century. Second, the post 1991 period presents a major turning point, transforming migration into a mass social phenomenon. And the third, migration should not be understood as a story of departure. It is also a story of adaptation, resilience, identity, and continuing connections between Georgia and the rest of the world, let's say. So, the Georgian diaspora has become an important part of Georgia's contemporary reality, and the understanding migration therefore helps us understand not only where Georgians go, but also how Georgia itself continues to evolve. So this is the main points I wanted to talk about. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to discussion. So thank you very much. Just stop sharing.
Lasha, thank you very much. That was a fascinating presentation, very clear and well balanced. And as you point out, it's not entirely negative, and the problem is how this issue is managed. Migration can be impacted by policy. So, as you say, migration is not going to stop, but the question is how can it be properly managed in such a way that it will benefit Georgia as well. So I'm now going to hand it over to Marina. Marina, I can see you, uh, although you're sort of integrated and not integrated. You're looking rather ghost-like, I think now, but we can see you.
Yes,
Yeah, we can see
I
you.
I can just in so I apologize, but it's not my problem. I am not
Right.
in Tbilisi. I am in Kakheti,
Yeah. Okay, well, we can
and
hear you, which is important.
there was
Maybe I spoke too early.
Thunderstorm here.
Okay.
Okay, I turn off the video because so do you hear me now?
Yeah, that's a better situation now, I think. Yeah.
Yes,
So
it's
Marina,
much better.
I already introduced you. So
I know, Stephen. I have heard. I was there
okay.
from the very beginning.
Okay, well, go ahead. Thanks so
So
much for joining us.
thank you very much for inviting, and thus I will try to somehow contribute to this webinar because, as Stephen said, I'm not the specialist in migration and Lasha. Thank you very much giving such an overview of the migration in Georgia. So I want to I looked at several policy papers concerning the migration, and I will just relay on that. One is from the Vanochkikwadze that he published. Another is I said. Then another one from 2014 to 2020 is OECD report about the migration from Georgia. And the last one is the, let's say, overview from the IOM about the problems of the re-entering back to Georgia. So basically, I will concentrate on two topics: who is migrating, and for what, and second, who is emigrating from Georgia and for what. So it's easy to start with emigration because there were several waves of the emigration, and there is a particular difference what was from 90 till 2014 and what is now, because the data set clearly shows that the main reason for the emigration that had this growth twice or even more from 2020 and 2003. These are two peaks of the emigration to EU and the United States. So it's after the reason is considered by ISAT reports. They clearly said that the reason is unclear, but they somehow connected with the COVID pandemic and also with the decline of the possibility to live in Georgia based on the authoritarian consolidation of the power by a ruling party. Particularly the difference, what is striking here is that in 2002 and in 2003, it's not the, let's say, personal or individual immigration, but these are the families who are migrating, and the age cohort from 0 to 29 increased dramatically because almost 64,000 children were emigrated with their parents and family in EU, particularly in Germany and France. France is the best destination, at least. For the, not all of them, but majority applied for the asylum, but by the either for the educational purpose or the health purpose, or they just simply the family because of the unemployment. So what is the difference to compare these several waves is that they now highly educated and civilly active young generation is tend to leave Georgia, at least for 10 years, as they say, just to establish themselves, get better education, find their ways of their own life. And then depending on that, what will and how the situation develops in Georgia, then to come back. So I would say that it's more, let's say, their wishful thinking rather than the it will happen or not. So we will see in future. So what is the from the another side, what is the immigration process, or excuse me, immigration process? So it has very clear, let's say, pattern, and around 100,000, it's almost 97,000, a little bit more Russians migrated to Georgia from the beginning of the Russian-Ukraine war. On the another place, these are the Ukrainian migrants, they around 30,000. And then the migrants from Azerbaijan, Turkey are there. Concerning the migration process, so it's very clear that, and what's interesting, that age of these migrants, particularly from Russian Federation, varies from 25 to 44 years. So what we have in, let's say, in set of the just now in Georgia, so the labor force or active labor force as an active reproductive age is leaving Georgia, and people 50 50 and above are staying in Georgia. We do not see any patterns of the migration. And women, particularly, the number of the women increased from 2020, and the peak again goes to 2022, 23. However, the migration has its how to say, different causes. So, for example, if we look at the map, the men particularly were migrating to the Russian Federation most, and women were migrating to Greece and Italy. And women, what they are doing from OECD report is clearly shows that they are on the with high qualification. They are most involved in family care, in babysitting, all the elderly caring, etc. So they are basically doing the unqualified job, and due to this part, when they are re-entering again in Georgia, so for them it is very difficult to find their place. From 2010, the let's say so, the research was focused, very scattered, but still research was focused on the families who from where women left for as a breadwinners, just to economical support for the families. And 2010, it was the first publication how in this was the case study on TNT women, and it clearly shows that the reasons why they leave the country is the economical. However, this affects seriously their let's say, emotional well-being, and for them, after the re-entering the back to the or coming back to the families or trying to find the jobs, it's almost failure, because they have somehow lost the contact, and what they regret most of all, they are saying that we are going for just to make sure that our children have the food, but what we are losing is the emotional contact with them. So I will shift to the another question, how the situation is changed after the immigration waves. The higher education institutions and practically medical schools are very much the hosts of these young migrants. They are staying in Georgia until they are at the university, in the medical school, basically. And Indians, Pakistanis, Arabs who are coming in Georgia, basically they live some type of sort isolated lives. They are intercommunicating within each other. They do not try to be somehow involved in the general activities, meaning in the general life of the Georgian society. The exception was the one, and it has not very good feedback from the Georgians, that on New Year Eve, it's the 1st of January, so the Rustaveli Avenue was full of the students who were just celebrating together, meaning the foreigners who are studying in Tbilisi, full of the students, and there were some comments that what they are doing here, etc. So I simply wrote that if you have been outside of your let's say country, so the only place where you can meet and celebrate the New Year is out of the streets. However, it was just the, let's say, feedback that clearly shows that Georgian society is not ready to incorporate any, let's say, newcomers. By the way, the newcomers also have no intention to be incorporated in Georgia, because after the graduation, almost 90% leaves Georgia and goes back to their own country. What we left actually as a problematic is that who migrated in last 2 years and who is going to stay. And it's clearly that the young cohort, or just capable labor force who emigrated from Russia, they are going to stay in Georgia. At least there are no signs, because to compare to Ukrainians, for Ukrainians only 30,000 have left. Otherwise, starting from the Ukrainian war, around 1,500 people had used the Ukrainians as a transit country, Georgia, just to leave and go in a different destination. So this, to look at this, it means that young generation, or those who are emigrating now from Georgia, will be replaced, not will be replaced, but Georgia will be left with the aging cohort of the people, and these new immigrants will feel the, let's say, the labor market, or they will have more capacities to develop within the Georgia. This makes I would say, the dramatic disbalance in Georgian population, at least for now. And what about the next possible ways? It very much depends on how the Georgian dream will continue with the consolidating the power. And one another issue that I want to highlight, that in February, I guess, there was interpellation, and Prime Minister was talking in the parliament, saying that every year, due to the foreign students, so in budget there is a 300 million lari income. So right now, when Prime Minister introduced the reform of higher education, and there is a quota and restriction for the foreign students, I doubt that there will be many students who will come, and the private institutions won't be able just how to absorb all this, let's say, flow. And it means that this reform in education will affect the immigration process of the young cohort who was ready to get the education in Georgia. And finally, what are the psychological consequences? I can only speculate, and I can just give one example. In June, no, excuse me, in May, beginning of May, I have been in Batumi, and I have talked in Georgian to to only four people. One, my PhD, two taxi drivers, and the third, the administrator at the hotel. All other time, I have heard only Russian language, and communication in the streets, etc., was purely in Russian. So the populating the small city like Batumi with so many foreigners has changed the culture itself in terms that the feeling is that you are in a different country that you have used. I can say that the people who are just in Tbilisi, so they are complaining, and there is no clear, let's say, I want to stay emphasize that there is no clear economic policy how these immigrants are supporting or contributing to the country in terms of the taxation, in terms of the involvement in the, let's say, social life, or they are making, and there are clear signs that they are making their own closed entities where they are exchanging or interacting between themselves with no cohesion to the existing society. I think this will become problematic. And concerning the families, the trend what was in 2020 and 23 clearly shows that now people are living with the families, except of the personal emigration for just breadwinning to the family, because they do not see any capacity to develop, to maintain their families here in Georgia, because they do not see the future. That's all what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Marina, thank you very much. I think you filled in there a lot of gaps in terms of what the impact is on Georgian society itself from these new trends of migration, particularly the massive emigration, but also the new immigrants that are arriving in Georgia. I think this is certainly a potential focus of study for an up and coming PhD student. Because we know nothing about really about these new immigrants from South Asia and elsewhere. I'm going to now turn to the questions that I had. I can see from the time we've got about 30 minutes left, so I might reduce the number of questions I ask our speakers so I can then hand it over to the audience. But my first question goes to Lasha then, and it concerns the sort of longitudinal aspect of migration in Georgia. In my introduction, I pointed out that this has been migration, mobile populations. It's really been something so central to Georgian history. And I'm wondering, Lasha, the 20th century has really been significant in terms of the numbers, let's say, of migrants, right? And in particular from the 1990s and 2000s, when the economic situation drove so many Georgians out of the country. How different do you think the migration processes and trends that we see in the 1990s and 2000s on is from other periods of Georgian history? Is it just, part of a pattern, or is this something really very different in terms of the pressures, as you pointed out, it's putting on the demographics of Georgian society?
Yes, Stephen. Thank you. Thank you for the question. So, to answer your question, yes, I would argue that we have we have seen since 1991 an unusual um, migration flows, both in scale and in character also. So, if we look at the earliest periods of Georgian migration, The first wave in the late 19th and the early 20th century was relatively small and involved specific groups such as Korean riders, as I mentioned before, and there were some workers also, and very limited economic migrants. The second wave, following after the Soviet occupation of Georgia in 1921 and World War II, was primarily political. And those migrants included members of political elite, intellectuals, military officers, and refugees escaping Soviet rule. And what makes the post 1991 period different is the migration became a mass social phenomenon, I would say. For the first time, migration affected virtually every region, every family in Georgia, I would say, and it was no longer limited elites, political exiles, or some specific professionals. And another important difference is destination diversity. Early migrants often moved to a single destination or region, but today Georgians are migrating to Europe, North America, Turkey, I don't know, Israel, and many other countries, I would say. And in the end, to sum up, the modern migration is increasing day by day, and thanks to the digital communication, cheap travel, I would say, and global financial systems, migrants can remain connected to Georgia
Right.
in any way they were possibly for previous generations. So today's migration is not only a larger in scale, but also fundamentally different in how migrants maintain ties with their homeland, I would say. So yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Thanks for that, uh, Lasha. I'm going to now turn to Marina, ask her a question. The World Bank estimates that women made up 49% of Georgian migrants in 2000, and by 2020 it climbed to 56%. And you mentioned, that studies have already started on the specific sort of gender aspect of migration, and Tianeti was the example you mentioned. But more broadly, what are the special issues do you think associated with this increasing migration of women and the impact that it has on Georgian society and their families at home, and their own problems, as you mentioned already, with reintegrating in Georgian society? Could you address that, Marina, more broadly?
Um, I try to address this. Just looking on that, what we have as a scattered resources. So clearly there is no focus on that. What is the reason that? Sorry, what are the problems Georgian women are facing? So I think that it's pure speculation. I think that one of these, the why Georgian women are migrating more is that they are ready to take unqualified work. This is the
Okay.
first.
Right.
Second, there is a clear, how to say, set, let's say, invisible ceilings that, for example, there are no adequate work conditions for the women and they are paid less salary than men. The difference is 80%, and you and women had a large report about that. The third is that there is very difficult to get the career development in terms that, for example, in different fields where almost 90% of women are the professions have 90% women, decision makers are men. So there is no clear path how you will be can get from that, let's say, circle. You have to take 10 times more time and resources and effort just to get a little somewhere in middle level. Fourth, it could be, and it's one of the main reasons that I'm sorry to say that it's not my speculations, but the research in evolutionary psychology and in social experimental psychology clearly shows that Women are more concentrated on the how to say, taking care of their children and of the household, and they somehow are sacrificing just to be sure that at least the household and the children will get minimum economic support, and that's why they are leaving the country. But
Mm.
what about this spike, what we had in 2022 and 23? It's that when the age cohort, 64, around 64,000 children from age of 0 to 19, and 38,000 is from 10 to 14, so they cannot be migrated anywhere without their mothers.
Right.
So, and this also increased the number of the women who are not solely emigrating, but who are emigrating with the families. So, and this, there is the ambiguous attitude towards those women who are in emigration. One part is that people appreciate their input and their sacrifice, etc. But the another part is, I would say that it's they say more in the declarative way that if she will work here, so she cannot get something for the feeding the family, and rational answer is very clear, no. Because, for example, nurse in, let's say, intensive care who has only 3 lari per hour. So this same nurse can be perfectly fitted in the daycare or any type of the care, elderly or the babysitter, and she gets 10 times more in one day than the even during the entire month. So
Right.
I think that problem, and I cannot say that these women, even those cohort who left in 2022, 2023, so they will get, basically it's the data set on EU, they will get the qualified work there, but at least they will have more, they will be more confident that their shift to the another country is a benefit for their families.
Right.
What is
Right.
left here, so I mean that it's two type of the discourse. First is that generally we do not speak about the seriousness of the migration process in media, so it has no public awareness. So
Mhm.
personally for me, it was also just finding all these materials is exploring that it will become the huge issue.
Mm.
And second, everything goes to, let's say, Ura patriotic declarations and just focusing on the women's role, and etc., etc., in pure, let's say, patriarchal way,
Mm.
plus with the elements of the patriotism, etc. And this
Right.
discourse is set up only for the one of the attributes, just to consolidating power again about the traditions, values, etc.,
Right.
that has nothing
Right.
to do in reality.
Right. And I'm sure the church has a role in that too. But let me turn back now to Lasha. Thank you, Marina. I've got time, I think, just for two very brief questions. And Lasha, one of the aspects you're studying is migration to the US, and I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about or how you would evaluate the success of Georgians integrating in US society. Um, diasporas are notoriously argumentative among one another, and you mentioned these different waves, which brings in different types of migrants. And sometimes, you know, even Georgian migrants among themselves are cannot accommodate each other, right? You've got maybe aristocrats from the 1930s mixing with prisoners of war coming after World War II and quite different social backgrounds. I wonder how all that helps us understand the experience of Georgian migrants when they come to the US and how problematic is it for them to integrate into US society.
It's a really good question, Stephen. Thank you for that. Just briefly about the history. The first wave, most of them came back to Georgia, and after that, they came back to United States, and some of them stayed there. Namely, one of them was Barbara Imnadze, one of the female
Right.
horse riders. The second wave is the best example of assimilation and integration to the U.S. Mainstream society, I would say, because they had the plan. They established a lot of diaspora organizations. They opened the restaurants, the businesses, and they eventually even changed the last names and became more Americans, let's say.
Mm.
And the third wave after the 90s, we should split it like per 10 year. In the 90s, most like 99% of Georgians we are either caregivers or some labor workers. And after the 2000s, and namely after the 2015, when this illegal migration, sorry to say, became popular throughout not only Georgians, there are a lot of other country representatives. They became more informed about their rights, about the agencies through the US, about the states, which is the best option to enter United States, namely Texas was the bad choice, and the California was much easier to
Okay.
enter and ask for, let's say, asylum, to get
Okay.
an asylum seeker status from Californians. And there were a lot, not a lot, but couple of key figures, ethnically Georgians, who were helping them, of course, for the money. And it changed, but eventually, illegal migration is, I would say, kind of stopped right now at the moment because
Mhm.
the focus changed to Canada right now. They are going there and the process is the same. They are
Right.
looking for the asylum and getting the resident permit, work permit, etc. But
Okay.
the last wave after the 2015, let's say, and it's pretty hard to say, but a lot of Georgians from my generation and younger generation left Georgia, but they were informed, and most of them are speaking Georgian, English, I'm sorry, and they know
Yeah.
their rights. Of course, they have to go through like not comfort situations. They are detained, they need the lawyer, they need the
Right.
sponsor, and there
Right.
are a lot of steps. But they know the non-governmental organizations,
Yeah.
governmental organizations who are operating on that. So it
Yeah.
helps. It helps.
Okay.
So
Good.
very
Thank you so much, Lasha. That's a very good analysis in
good.
terms of the different, waves, different generations, and how they adapt. Marina, I'm going to turn to you for one very quick question because I want to open it up to the audience. One of the big connections between, let's say, the reaction of right-wing populists and their success in Europe is immigration. Do you see any connection between immigration, in particular, in the last, let's say, decade or so, when, as you pointed out, you've got Indians and Chinese who do not integrate in Georgian society. How much that contributes perhaps to the rise of populism in Georgia. Is there a connection there, or is it other sources in Georgia's case?
Um, Thank you, Stephen. I doubt that I can answer this question because there is no clear stress on that, meaning that for the Indians or the Pakistanis or Arabs, because they are source of the income, so their attendance is not interfere directly to the labor market. However, there were several, let's say, discussions concerning the construction work when the Chinese and Arab workers are present in Georgia, and there are, let's say, voices coming to the voices of upset population comes that why we are not employed except of these people, and the, let's say, justification from the government and business sector is because they are not qualified. However, so the neither government nor the business sector is doing anything. However, all the promises with the new developmental plans is that there will be the increase of the employment, etc. So there is no evidence that we see the increase of the employment of the local people. So I
Right.
think that this is the potential and carrying one of the risk factors that will be somehow blow up lately.
Yeah, right. Okay. Thanks, Marina. I'm going to now turn over to the questions. We've got about 15 minutes left. Um, and I'm going to go through them in order. The first one is Georgia has a strongly developed cultural and religious community and a very difficult and unfamiliar language. How does this impact long-term immigrants' experience when they arrive in Georgia? And this is either Lasha or Marina. Which one of you would like to answer that one?
So
I
my
can,
answer will be,
sure.
sorry, my answer will be very short. Coming from the experience what we had in the former Soviet Union, so the Russians won't learn any language, any Georgian language, and they were perfectly be suited in Georgia. So
Right,
there is no need for them to learn the Georgian,
right,
either on the governmental level or on the societal level, so that they do not think that they have to somehow adapt to that situation. By the way, it's a little bit different story with Ukrainians because Ukrainians more or less try to have the everyday some, let's say 300, 500 words just to communicate.
right. And of course, English is extremely popular language now in Georgia, and I'm guessing many of these
It's
long-term
very
immigrants.
unstable internet. I do not hear Stephen.
Oh, okay. Well, let me turn to Lasha. Lasha, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, very shortly, like I would say that Georgia is generally a welcoming to foreigners, but long-term integration can be a bit challenging. But the Georgian language is like significant barrier, and the strong cultural and religious traditions mean that the deeper integration often takes time.
Yeah,
But those who learn the language and engage in the local communities usually integrate much more successfully, I would say.
right. Okay, good. All right. So, second question. Rena, can you still hear us?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Second question. Georgian, oh no, sorry, here we are. Armenia has a much larger international diaspora than Georgia and Azerbaijan, than Georgia, and Azerbaijan has strong ethnic, linguistic, and cultural ties to Turkey. How do these characteristics explain the differences in migration patterns in and from the South Caucasus? So I guess the question is directed at what are the differences, and maybe we don't really know because we're not focusing on Armenia and Azerbaijan, but are there some differences between the three states that are significant and can be explained as the question suggests by stronger connections and stronger diasporas? How, let me turn to Lasha
Um,
first. Let me
yes,
turn to
please.
Lasha, Marina.
Sure.
Lasha, go ahead.
Uh, yeah, sure. So like to my mind, diaspora networks play a major role in the shaping migration patterns. So Armenia benefits from a large and pretty well established global diaspora, and that facilitates like migration, investment, and transnational connections, I would say. As for the Azerbaijan, it has like a strong linguistic and cultural ties with Turkey, and the Georgia's diaspora is smaller but increasingly global and diversified, particularly since independence. So, yeah.
Marina, you want to comment on that?
Not really, because I do not have a answer on that. I was myself exploring that, for example, in 2022, 2023, around 15,000 Azerbaijanis migrated from Azerbaijan to Georgia. So
Yeah.
I cannot say
Okay.
anything about
Yeah.
that.
Right. Okay. So here's another question. Let me ask Marina this one. Um, Georgian migration to Russia, its former imperial center, and of course, this is a very significant migration to Russia still, seems similar to other colonial populations' migrations to Britain or to France. Is this a false comparison or does it reflect a common experience? So I guess the question is focusing on the continuing colonial relationship between Russia and Georgians and the connections that leads Georgians to continue to migrate to the imperial center. I mean, what could
I
you?
think that there is two reasons for that, or at least two preconditions for that. First is the language. Men who are migrating to Russian Federation, they know Russian language. This is the first, so knowledge of the language of the work or interaction. And the second, what is it's the, let's say,
Right,
familiar societal, let's say, structure where they have used to live, and it is easier for them to adapt to that situation.
right,
If it is the colonial, let's say, attitudes and appreciations, I would say that those whom I have met who returned from Russia, so Russia from them is a still huge, big country that can be considered as one of the, let's say, superpowers.
right. And of course a major magnet for immigrants, right? Russia still is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Okay, Lasha,
Yes.
have you got any thoughts on this continuing colonial relationship that helps us explain perhaps the large number of Georgian migrants in Russia?
Yeah, like shortly to answer, like I think it reflects some common patterns and former like imperial connections often continue to influence migration through language, social networks, and economic ties. However, Georgia's Soviet experience differs from classical colonial relationships, I would say, such as Britain, France. So the comparison is useful, but not
Right,
exact, I would say.
right. Okay. All right. We've got two more questions. I think we might just be able to squeeze them in. I have one here from Johnny Ross. And this really touches on the issue of whether we can evaluate what's going on in terms of at least immigration into Georgia as positive as well as negative. I think Lasha, you talked about the sort of positive
Sure.
potential of this immigration, and so Johnny Ross focuses on a particular group, but maybe you could take it a little bit further. He says, I'm interested in the impact of retirees coming into the country, into Georgia. Has it been positive and are they supported? So that's one group, but could you
Yeah,
think about
sure, sure,
more other groups and their maybe positive contributions to Georgian?
sure. So as for the retirees, overall, the impact has been largely positive, I would say. Retirees contribute to local economies through housing, like services and everyday spending, let's say, and their numbers remain relatively modest, and they generally do not create significant pressure on public services, and they mostly, I would say, rely on a private resources rather than dedicated
Right.
retirement support programs. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, but it's an interesting phenomenon because I meet so many retirees and who now have decided to choose. I mean, formerly it might have been Costa Rica, but now sort of the cheap living that they can maintain
Yeah,
on
it's
on
cheap,
a
it's
yeah,
welcoming,
yeah,
so why
exactly.
not?
Yeah, exactly. Marina, I'm going to give you the last question. This is from Mariam Bashidze. I think this one is directed to you. Is there any research about the changing family structures? What are the psychological effects on children whose parents, in the worst case, both parents, leave? How does the community in Georgia support such children? And is there any social awareness about the unique challenges that these children or teenagers face? How can the general population support and show solidarity to immigrants and their family members? So that's, I think, in your patch. Marina, do you hear me? Okay, I think we've lost Marina. Um, I don't know, Lasha, do you think, Marina, are you back? No. So, Lasha, I don't know if you've thought about this. Is this whole question about government policy in terms of dealing or managing this exodus of immigrants that affects families and children back in Georgia? Can you hear me? You're muted, Lasha. You're muted.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was talking. So
Yeah.
yeah, as for that's not my like
Right.
profile, but I will try to. So yes, there is a considerable research in Georgian internationally, as I know, on what is often called like left behind children.
Mm,
The findings are mixed. On the other hand, the remittances can improve living standards, like education and access to the opportunities. On the
mm,
other hand, like prolonged separation from parents can lead to the, I guess, feelings of loneliness,
right.
anxiety, emotional stress, and difficulties in
Mm,
parent-child relations. And
mm,
more broadly, I think society can support these families by recognizing that the migration is often a difficult family decision,
right.
I would say,
Right.
especially for Georgians,
Yeah.
but not simply an economic one. In understanding the community engagement and
Right.
support for the children and the caregivers can help reduce some of the social and psychological costs of migration, let's say. But I'm not
Mm,
an expert in that field,
right.
so
Yeah. No. But a good answer too in terms of the sort of the multiple impacts it can have. Marina, I don't know whether you're still with us. You can hear us.
I am still, I was thrown out and now I'm back.
Did you hear the
Okay,
question? Did you hear the
yes,
question?
I read the question. So I think that Mariam listed all the let's say hot issues that are faced by the children when the one parent or both are out of the country. So it's who is taking care of? It's mainly kinship. So grandparents or the
Mm,
aunties or aunts are taking the care. So
mm,
there was no any evidence that these kids were thrown out of the street without any, let's say, connection with the adults, close adults,
mm,
relatives.
mm.
But it does not mean that these relatives are capable just to support their socialization in terms
Right.
that
Right.
either do not follow they are simply not capable, meaning, for example, if there is a big between grandparents and the youngster who is left here, there's no any
Mm,
social service particularly concentrated on this type of the I would call quasi-abandoned children because the feeling is that he or she is abandoned. And particularly when it's the under age of 12, so that there is no any other chance that it won't affect this child.
right.
Well, basically, they are getting care as via the school psychologists network that is under the Ministry of Education. If their behavior is seriously damaged, so they are simply taken there or referred there, and there is no any institution or there was So now the civic organizations are quite restricted, but there was no any organization, even civic
Right.
NGO or something, taking care of this type of the
Right.
kids and working
Right.
with them.
Okay. Well, that's a sad note to end on. But I want to thank both speakers for a really fascinating assessment of migration and its impact on modern Georgia. I think, as I said at the beginning, it's a really appropriate theme to finish on because it has such long-term implications for the future of Georgia. And this is something that hopefully we will continue to study and try and figure out solutions to. But anyway, I'm going to hand it back now to Salome, the president. But before I do, I just want to thank everyone else who's been involved in this series, Rolly Nuzzi in particular, and Philip Froy, who has been his assistant. And, it's been, as Salome said, a real collective effort. And Salome will tell you about where you can now access these presentations and other information that is available on our website, on the Georgian Association website, that can references and articles and such, if you're interested in taking any further. So, Salome, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Lasha. Thank you, Marina. Thank you, everybody, for attending and for speaking to this very important, pertinent topic, despite the bad weather in Georgia and all the other challenges that we sometimes face. Again, it was such a pleasure to host this series of webinars. I recommend everyone check out the georgianassociation.org website. Also follow us on LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram to keep in the loop. And you can also sign up for our, if you're not on social media, you can sign up for our quarterly newsletter that comes out and goes straight into your email inbox, so you don't have to follow us on the social media. But also recommending the bookshelf, which includes the materials that are recommended by our attendees and speakers throughout these sessions. We also host a book club that's actually meeting next week. And let me just give a preview of the fact that we will have Dato Urashvili discussing his book Flight from USSR, which is very connected to the topic of trying to get out of the kind of closed space that was the Iron Curtain. So very, difficult topic, but I think it's one that gives us a good foundation to think about as we go forward in our next series and continue to talk about how Georgia is shaped today, how its history, its culture, its heritage shapes the modern day, and hopefully the future in a very positive way. And together, the Georgian diaspora from the United States is coming together to make sure that that future is bright and hopeful and has a positive, light for children, as was discussed here, for young people who are looking to get good quality education, whether in the United States or elsewhere or in Georgia. And for our part, the association has always been committed to strengthening the ties between the two countries in a way that benefits Georgians in Georgia, Georgians in America, and the Georgian Americans as well. So on that note, let me end here. And again, thanks to our participants. Thank you, Stephen, for moderating today. And hopefully we will see you all again next academic year.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you very
Bye.
much. Have a good
Bye.
day.